Today I'm here to talk about some evil dudes, specifically cult leaders. And don't worry, Charles Manson and Jim Jones aren't on this list. Not that they weren't evil, but I think everyone's heard everything they ever need to hear about those two. Let's try to keep things varied. I'm your supreme deity, James, and these are the top 10 cults in history ruled by evil men. And we're starting things off with NXIVM. NXIVM was a secretive self-help organization founded in 1998 by Keith Raniere, initially promoting personal development courses. It eventually devolved into a highly manipulative cult. Not that any cults are really not manipulative, but anyway, Raniere's leadership tactics were incredibly exploitive, preying on vulnerable individuals seeking personal growth. He established a hierarchical system within the group where women were branded with his initials, and some were coerced into engaging in physically intimate relationships with him. This was labeled as this secret sisterhood of sorts, but it was really just a means of control. Raniere used deceptive tactics to maintain his power and influence, isolating members from their families and blackmailing them. Many who attempted to leave faced threats and legal battles carried out by the group. In 2019, Raniere was convicted of his crimes and sentenced to 120 years in prison in 2020. Number 9, the Order of the Solar Temple. This group was founded in 1984 in Geneva by Joseph de Mambro and Luc Jouret. The group took heavy inspiration from the Knights Templar, at least in their appearance, all wearing white robes with red crosses. There was also a heavy amount of secrecy as to what went on in the group, and members had to ascend in the ranks undergoing initiation rites in order to learn the secrets of the group. They also believed that the end of the world was imminent and that the apocalypse would happen at some point in the mid-90s. Just some point. Very safe way of convincing your members of your doomsday prophecy. At some point soon. The group were also taught by their brilliant leaders that life was just an illusion and that the physical body must be shed in order to experience a higher existence on another planet. De Mambro and Jouret ended up convincing several of the members to take their own lives. 53 members, including Jouret and De Mambro, took their own lives at various locations across Switzerland. They were found dead by authorities after remote control devices had ignited fires at the various locations. And then the following year, similar incidents occurred in 2 other locations, France and Canada. Next up, we have Synanon. Chuck E. Dederich founded Synanon in 1958 in Santa Monica, California. Started out as a drug rehabilitation program, although the methods used for care were pretty extreme. The whole idea was quitting cold turkey, which is not a bad thing at all, but in terms of the therapeutic side, members took part in an activity called The Game, where each member would open up about themselves and then receive verbal attacks from all the other members. People also lived at the compound. I feel like if you ever join some kind of religious or self-help kind of group and you're required to stay in a shared living space like indefinitely, it's a good chance you're probably in a cult. Oh, and members were forced to pay large sums of money for membership and perform physical labor. Dederich's methods only got worse though, as he enforced stricter rules on the group and incorporated brainwashing techniques in order to assert his control over them. Eventually, he ordered 2 members to take out a lawyer who was representing one of the members, saying she had been brainwashed and held at the compound against her will. The 2 members put a venomous snake in the lawyer's mailbox, and he nearly died after being bit. Chuck received a very light sentence and a fine, but was chucked out of the cult. Synanon did continue on without him until 1991, though. The Order was an American white supremacist group that was active between September of 1983 and December of 1984. Robert J. Matthews, the leader of the Order, was a fanatical figure with a rather dangerous agenda. He believed in a vision of a white ethno-state and advocated for a race war to achieve this goal. Matthews encouraged his followers to engage in acts of violence against perceived enemies. Under his guidance, the Order carried out a series of criminal activities to fund their operations and further their agenda. This included bank robberies and armored car heists, stolen funds being used to purchase weapons and explosives. The group also targeted individuals they viewed as threats, which included law enforcement officers. members. The order's violent actions resulted in the death of radio talk show host Alan Berg, who was just one of many enemies the group had on their hit list. The FBI launched a manhunt to apprehend Matthews and put an end to the order. In a deadly confrontation at a home in Whidbey Island, Matthews engaged in a shootout with law enforcement after refusing to surrender. The gunfire ignited a fire in the house, taking Matthews down with it. Next up, we have the Church of Euthanasia. Now, this one certainly isn't as evil as the other cults on this list, but it's still pretty extreme. I would not be able to stand hanging out with any of these people. The Church of Euthanasia, founded in Boston, Massachusetts in 1992 by Chris Korda, is a controversial cult known for its extremist views on population control and environmentalism. They've been considered by many as promoting evil ideologies due to the cult's radical stance on reducing the human population through pretty disturbing means. The church advocates for taking one's own life, cannibalism, just a couple of different methods. They set out to achieve their goal of lowering the global population. Now, while the church does claim to use satire to make a point about overpopulation's impact on the environment, their slogan is pretty disgusting, and no, I can't say it on here, nor would I really want to. Next up, we have the Narcosatanists, led by Adolfo Constanzo. His group was mostly active in Mexico in the 1980s, revolving around a combination of drug trafficking and occult practices. Constanzo grew up with a mother and stepfather who were both involved in crime. He also had this quote-unquote sorcerer dude who he had apprenticed under, who he would perform ritualistic sacrifices of animals with. Eventually, he gathered a bit of a following of powerful hitmen and drug traffickers. He exerted a strong hold over them, convincing them that he had supernatural powers. And under his influence, the cult engaged in illegal activities, including drug smuggling and violent rituals. Constanzo's evil deeds culminated in a series of these ritualistic murders where innocent victims were brutally sacrificed in an attempt to enhance the cult's powers. Finally, in 1989, law enforcement closed in on the group and Constanzo pulled a machine gun on authorities, leading to a final confrontation before ordering a fellow member to take his life. Number 4, Honohana Sampogyo. The Honohana Sampogyo cult was a religious group founded in Japan by Hogen Fukunaga. Fukunaga claimed to be the reincarnation of Buddha. Here we go. And convinced his followers that he possessed divine powers. The cult became known for its pretty extreme financial exploitation of the members. Fukunaga convinced his followers to donate significant amounts of money, claiming that doing so would bring them blessings and aid in their spiritual development. He also claimed he could diagnose people by reading their feet and would charge like $900 for these readings. Turns out the guy started the group while he was in tremendous amounts of debt, so he was just a full-on swindler, used car salesman type guy. He knew full well what he was doing. He didn't actually have some deranged belief in his message, and that's what's truly evil about this guy. He amassed some serious wealth through these donations, living a lavish lifestyle while his followers suffered financially. Next up, we have David Koresh's Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians cult was a religious group that gained attention due to its leader, David Koresh. The story actually begins, though, with Benjamin Roden, who founded it in 1955. But it was David who later emerged as the prominent figure. He joined the group in the early 80s, claiming to be a prophet and the final messenger of God. His manipulative tactics quickly became evident as he instilled fear and loyalty amongst his followers through strict control and psychological manipulation. He dictated every aspect of their lives, including relationships, daily activities, and inside the cult, he practiced polygamy and engaged in inappropriate relationships with some of his female followers. Can't go into too much detail on that. Common theme amongst these supremely morally superior cult leaders, though. In 1993, the cult's troubles escalated with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or the ATF, who attempted to execute a search warrant on the cult's compound in Waco, Texas. The raid turned into this violent shootout, resulting in the deaths of several agents and cult members. It led to a 51-day standoff between the Branch Davidians and law enforcement violent, and the standoff ended in absolute disaster when the compound caught fire, and the flames just started engulfing all these buildings, resulting in the deaths of 76 Branch Davidians, including the leader David Koresh, or Koresh. Next up, we have Shinrikyo. The Shinrikyo cult was a religious group founded in Japan in 1987 by Shoko Asahara. Initially, the cult kind of presented itself as a spiritual organization with the aim of helping people achieve enlightenment, but as time passed, it became pretty evident that the group had more malevolent intentions. Asahara pulled the strings, manipulating his followers into committing a bunch of horrific acts. He instilled a sense of blind loyalty amongst his disciples, using mind control techniques to exert complete control over their thoughts, actions. But under his direction, Shinrikyo carried out a series of violent acts, including, of course, the infamous Tokyo subway sarin gas attack in 1995 that resulted in the deaths of 13 people and injured thousands. The act was planned to just be the tip of the iceberg, too, in the extreme measures they were going to use to fulfill their goals. Asahara claimed to prophesize this apocalyptic vision and believed in imminent global destruction, leading his followers to stockpile weapons and engage in activities aimed at kind of destabilizing society. He had this complete disregard for human life and was willing to harm others to fulfill his ambitions. He even made a statement about how disappointed with what he saw as a low death toll in the 1995 subway attacks. And finally, we have the Anthill Kids. The Anthill Kids was a cult led by Roch Thériault in 1977. The group was based in Canada and followed a pretty twisted belief system. Essentially, they were a doomsday cult, but Thériault's charismatic manipulation led his followers to believe he possessed divine powers and that with his help, they would be the sole survivors of this coming apocalypse. Pretty standard cult stuff, but man, this is the worst cult I've ever read about. It's really gross. Can't talk about most of it on here, but anyway. Under his influence, the cult members isolated themselves from the outside world, creating a closed, kind of secretive community on a mountainside that their divine leader didn't even help them build. He just kind of sat back and watched. And behind this facade of spiritual enlightenment, Thériault subjected his followers to severe physical and psychological mistreatment. He enforced strict and incredibly bizarre rules on them, and he started becoming increasingly more erratic in his behavior. His true nature came out in acts of violence and control, inflicting harm on his followers in the name of discipline and purification. Some members endured severe physical torture, including beatings. They'd have amputations done on them. This guy claimed he had magical powers that would allow him to reattach his followers' body parts, and his reign of terror eventually led to the death of one of his many wives, and he was eventually arrested but received an incredibly light sentence because it's Canada, and wouldn't you know it, he went back to doing the exact same crap before being arrested again, and years later a fellow inmate put an end to him for good. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.